give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and JoHanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? Yeah, so I want to deep dive into this conversation about what's happening with DEI and the Trump administration and what the plans had been for Project 2025.
Yeah.
And for me, it really relates to like creating, as we were just saying, a white nation, because the dog whistling and calling in and targeting DEI, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's a component about accessibility that was in the executive order, which I'll kind of like go over in a second. But yeah, like this targeting of DEI previous to any of the electoral process, there was the conversation, a couple years back about woke and who's woke and who's not woke. And when we refer to woke, meaning that I'm just going to define it very simply, is being aware of the impacts of white supremacy and capitalism.
Yeah.
That's the way that I want to define what woke is.
That's how
Regardless of how you fall under the spectrum, how you identify, it is being aware of the impacts of white supremacy and capitalism. Boom. So be woke, don't be woke, whatever.
Yeah.
There's impacts and the impacts are there. And so now with Trump administration and being the face of this Project 2025 and rolling out what looks like a white nation, there's this conversation about DEI and then the targeting of DEI. What is the benefits of that to the North Star of Project 2025? And the way that I understand and experience DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, being someone who I don't ever feel like I have been in professional settings where diversity, equity, and inclusion are the thing that has helped or benefited me in any way, shape, or form. So like what I understand about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I like to call it ideas. So inclusion, diversity, equity, accountability, I like pulling in accountability and sustainability, like, setting up structures and systems that are actually sustainable for the larger group of people and still holding on to this like very capitalistic understanding because it produces the most effective outcomes. So like that's how I understand diversity, equity, inclusion, or ideas. I experience and know and train and have conversations about the benefits of it actually expanding the bottom line because now you have more possibilities of pathways of being able to reach whatever North Star. You have more experience, you have more things to analyze. It's just like research. When you have a larger target, a larger research demographic, you can come up with better outcomes or even the things in your hypothesis that do fail is a solution to something else that you might not have been thinking about. And so the more experience and the more inclusion and the more diversity of understanding and thought you have, the more reasoning, the stronger the analysis can be for the best outcomes. And so that's how I understand DEI. And so this targeting of DEI and the way that it's used in the social context of the United States, where the rhetoric is saying that it is being used to provide people who might not be qualified with an opportunity. I'm offering the thought process with the people who are more qualified, have never had the opportunity to be in positions of quality. And throughout the history of the United States, you see that even if we're just looking into our entertainment, for those of us who are not documentarians or historians or anything like that, and we're looking at, the women that helped get the spaceship up to space back in the day, right? Before
right,
before there was policies and programs that allowed people with high levels of skill to
right,
be operating in positions of skill because it was heavily white male operated, and there was even white females who could only do secretarial positions. And then
right.
there was a whole bunch of black identified people and black females in particular doing math calculations that were never ever um, acknowledged, violated, shared with anybody, but the resource was used to have the outcome. So, like, when we think about things like that, just like that one example that actually had the United States falling behind in their
Mhm.
ability to be exploratory in space because they weren't using all of the wealth of knowledge that was around them. That's what we see when we start targeting something like DEI. Forget that those of us who have more skill to be in position need to have access and opportunity to be in position so that we have better outcomes, because it really does expand and evolve what already exists, because
Right.
obviously what already exists is at its limit because we got to what exists. So now trying to create beyond what exists, you need a more expanded thought process, because
Mhm.
that's how we do, that's how we evolve.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm taking up time, I'm taking up my DEI time.
It's
And,
all
and I'm
you.
passing it, and I'm passing it on to you, white identified women, so that look, we're sharing the space. Nobody is getting hurt and harmed, but we all
Yeah,
can share the space
sure.
and offer each other information.
Here. Yeah,
Yeah.
years ago I did a training called Racial Equity Institute training, and it was this was in the early time of my awakening, and it broke me wide open in terms of the things that I learned in terms of the timeline of white supremacy and how it manifested itself in when my ancestors colonized this land, that this is how it all went down. So it was a timeline of events. And I remember one of the teachings that really impacted me was the information around the birth of affirmative action and
Mm,
what it was what the intention of creating it was in the early days. And this was in the 1600s, 1700s, way back in the early days, even before this country was a country. The rule, or the guidelines for affirmative action, and I'm not sure they called it that at that time, but it was intentioned to make sure that whiteness would be acknowledged and afforded access. So it wasn't, I always thought of affirmative action because of the time frame that I grew up in. It was always talked about with regard to making sure and to me, I mean, I might be wrong about this, so correct me if I'm not, but the what we're calling DEI now is really another iteration of affirmative action, but I feel like it's a deeper step or a more acknowledged step, but it's a similar guidelines or a similar trajectory. And so, but I was so interested to find out that affirmative action was actually created to benefit white people in the early days. And then the understanding that white women have been the biggest beneficiaries of the access and benefits of any kind of program that has to do with either affirmative action or DEI all throughout its history. Um, and so, we think about DEI and how it's being used today, that it's really become a slur in being used by people that used to be woke. Don't be woke, we got to get wokeness out of the military and wokeness out of this and that. And now it's DEI. So I feel like, the goalpost just keeps changing in terms of the language, which we all know has been happening in good ways too, so language morphs and we understand that. But it's astounding to me how little white women especially know about how the elimination of these programs can directly impact us, will directly impact us, and how oblivious we are to that. And we
We're
were,
not oblivious, Deanne. Like not everybody
well,
is like you. A majority of white women, I would say, are not like you, right? And so, as we're talking about black women being tired of being at the front lines of
right.
the struggle, maybe white women are tired too, and just want to return back to the father's knows best positionality of vibe. I'm just going to keep it real, being pregnant, because that's what you're going
Yeah,
to be able to do, right? And
right.
helping to increase the white nation is be pregnant. You don't
It's
need
the
to be going to work, be pregnant and be protected. And that's enough. And maybe people are tired and are excited about returning to that level of
maybe,
reality.
maybe,
You know,
right,
because
maybe.
that's what you basically signed up for. And that being the case, then that's what I'm so I'm just always so curious about this. I'm not curious. I'm not curious because I understand I understand white supremacy. But
Yes.
I, I- but I'm like the psychology of needing this level of domination, power, and position.
Hmm.
It's just that's a place that I just never am going to be able to access
Right.
an understanding about. Because there's actually enough resources to go around. We are reducing our resources, but there's enough resources to go around, and limited thinking is so limiting. Why would you want to exist in that? Because we're way more connected than the way that we understood connections, to your point, to the evolution of language. We are way more a connected society. We're not drifting away from our level of connection because technology is making us more connected
Right.
and
Right.
showing us that there's larger pockets of folks with the same understanding as you have. So like back in the day, it was easier to do the mental manipulation of white supremacy
Hmm.
because knowledge was limited. Now the manipulation of white supremacy is so much more difficult because you have all of these other resources that can completely negate what white supremacy is asking us to do. But then we have the complexity, the internal struggle of we all, no matter where we are, have existed in some form of impact of white supremacy. It's just like different levels of it. So coming out of the United States, you're going to be like at the 99th percent of existing in white supremacy. Living in any large colonized nation that still holds the colonization in strength, okay, so then you reduce your percentages,
Right.
so we all have this component of like white supremacy that exists within our DNA structure now that we are
Hmm.
operating under. And but still having the knowledge that it is actually white supremacy, that it is actually an invalidated taking of power and mental manipulation that we are not fighting.
I know.
That we're not fighting, that we are literally just accepting across the globe.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I'm more of a maroon indigenous spirit, so
Yeah.
I
I
don't
don't,
know. Like,
I don't either. I don't either. I'm new to the fight. I'll be the first to admit that. It hasn't been my whole life that I've been railing at and so I can't believe how I guess I have a little bit of the reason I use the term oblivious, and I don't like using that term because it makes it sound like the people like we're victims or something of our not knowing, which I don't mean to suggest that we are. We're not victims of our not knowing. And yet the indoctrination is so complete. And maybe I have a little, I'm giving a little bit of allowance for that because I know what it feels like to be fully indoctrinated to the point of not seeing anything, and I have some understanding of an awakening of what that feels like, and then I have some understanding of knowing that that awakening is going to be happening for the rest of my life, and then I'm never going to completely undo the indoctrination. It's going to be a lifelong journey for me. So I understand all of that, and but you and I were talking before we came on the recording that it's like the highest level of mental illness to
Mhm.
to and
You're
I
saying
don't,
that for other.
yeah, and I don't know if the indoctrination is just so damn good and so damn complete that that our
It
brains are
is.
broken. Okay.
It is. It
It is.
is. And it's so deep. And then that's also like why I have compassion for the not knowing
Yeah,
because we just get into the rhythm of how we choose to exist.
right.
But then I don't have compassion because it is such a strategic and intentional methodology
Yes.
that it's not like we're not aware of it now because we know that white supremacy exists on a foundation of lies, but we are accepting those lies. We have
Hmm.
all of the things to completely dismantle its 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 effect, and we have not
Hmm.
because there is this being a part of your DNA and being a part of what is familiar to how you move is sometimes easier to accept and just to operate under because there is so much other chaos. And so it's just like the most that I can deal with within all of this chaos is what I can deal with. And what I can deal with is understanding what my power and position is under the structure that I'm very familiar with.
Hmm.
And that is how we continue to allow this to continue to exist.
What comes up for me also too as a component is the comfort piece. So when I have conversations with white people, either in my family or in my, general vicinity who are still choosing to live, like this, not looking at, I had a deep conversation with my sister over the holidays whose best friend is a Zionist, and she and my sister and I have been at odds, and her best friend is no longer speaking to me because she's a Zionist and doesn't believe, you know is choosing to stay asleep. And when I was having my conversation with my sister and having to say, you do realize these things are happening, babies are being shot in the head by snipers, and this is happening every day, and I've been watching videos of beheaded babies every day, and this is what I said to her, I said, it's a moral failure. And this is where I think where the conversation shifted, because I said to her, I said, it's a moral failure that your friend chooses not to see the reality of the ideology that she is supporting. And I also said to her, it's a moral failing to you to keep your eyes closed because you don't want to lose your friend. You are choosing to not know what's happening in the world and that your taxpayers are paying for because you don't want to lose your best friend. There's a comfort piece that weighs into this too. And that was a bit of the turning point for her, I feel like, in our conversation. And she did say she was going to watch the movie Israelism. I don't know if she ever did. I need to follow up with her and find out if she did and try to have that conversation with her. But that's what I bump up against when I talk to other white identified people who are still living as if none of this stuff is happening, or because the comfort, because there is no pushback on their comfort, they don't feel the compulsion to try to find out. There are people out there that will say that all of these white people are they're just idiots, or they're horrible people because they don't want to see. And I hear that, and I totally understand that, but I also feel like there's another iteration, that it's not just horrible people who choose not to see. There's a comfort level somewhere in there that feeds that indoctrination, and that compulsion to stay asleep, because
Mhm.
to go out of that comfort feels terrifying. And we were talking before about how whiteness doesn't have the skill set to know how to navigate a
Mhm.
discomfort world, and so
Mhm.
all of those things I think weigh in. I'm not making excuses for anybody. I'm only just offering the
No, that's real.
because it boggles my mind too, as a person who was completely asleep, woke up a little bit, woke up a little bit, woke up a little bit, and will continue to wake up. It's like I know where they are. I understand where they are, because I used to be there, and there are still places that I am still there because I know I will always be journeying. and how to break that shell. And that's why you and I have talked before about how the conversations, when you have conversations with white identified people about this, it looks very different than when I have the
Right.
conversations, because I feel like I need to do this, I need to shake them. I need to shock them into something to break that comfort hold. And I don't think that works the same for you or anybody that's non-white, to try to have those dialogues, because then the fragility comes up and everything gets violent. So yeah, I don't know what my point of all of that was, but it's just stuff that rolls around in my head as I try to have these conversations with other white identified folks.
Yeah, no, because it's going to be critical to continue to have these conversations. This is a part of DEI, right? You
Yeah,
can talk into your in group
yeah,
and be creating this kind of whirlpool of like fanaticism, really, right? Or you can talk to your in group and say, curious about this other in group and what it is that they're thinking and how the impacts are on them, and check in with this group and what are the intersections across these groups. That's what DEI lends for us. And if we don't have access to the minds and the thought processes of other experiences, then
mhm,
it's really it's just there's no benefit. Like you do lose from that. You lose from it from an economic perspective. You lose from it from a social perspective. You lose from it from a health perspective, right?
right.
Because we don't exist as the same beings. We are all humans, but we have different experiences. We have, our blood is the same and our DNA is human DNA,
Mhm,
but our experiences and the way that manifests itself is completely and totally different.
yeah.
And that, DEI allows the opportunity for us to explore that and again, come up with solutions that are beneficial to everyone. So it's a mind trickery. The manipulation is what we're talking about to use DEI and white victimization and white tears
Mhm.
as the excuse for eliminating opportunities for us to expand more, right? So, like in this strategy, you're really like creating an opportunity to make everyone continue to think in one way,
To stay stagnant.
to
Yes,
stay very, very stagnant.
yes.
And
Because
that is
addiction is where the power is. Yeah,
hmm And that's what propaganda looks like, y'all. That's what like marketing and branding, like our existence definitely comes from narrative storytelling and marketing and propagandizing our
right.
minds and more access to being able to do that, right? Because now technology is helping to manipulate our own minds. I'm sorry, I'm talking slow, but I'm trying to get the thought out.
Yep.
But technology is recording the things that we're talking about, liking, saying that we want and need, so that
Mhm.
it can then regurgitate and manipulate our
Right.
brains. So like
And keep us in a
the
bubble. Right.
yeah, the ability to access and to get us, doing what they want us to do
Mm.
has become expanded. And so we need to be like, how are we connecting those things so that we could be in the benefit of that to be able to make sure that we are having more inclusive groups and diverse groups of people doing all of that stuff together.
Mhm.
I'm much more excited about what those possibilities look like than having to deal with watching this process of limitation go through the Trump administration and the way that it's going through the Trump administration.
I wish we could have conversations with those in power based on what you were just saying, to say, why are you afraid? Where I'm curious about where the fear is around expansion. What is it about expansion that terrifies you so much? I feel like I know the answer. But
What do you think the answer is?
well,
That's,
because the
yeah.
perception of, I think the scarcity perception feeds into that. The whole concept of, which, like you said a mouthful when you said limited thinking is so limiting. I love
Yeah,
that.
it is.
That's a new J-ism for me. I'm gonna put that on my wall.
Do a
Limited.
painting.
It's so limited because, and I know that sounds, but it's true, and it's like,
That's the thing.
and in our society, we have been taught the scarcity mindset that there's not enough to go around, that it's a zero-sum game, that if I give to you, that means I have less. That almost everything in our society is framed with that foundational framing.
Mm, mm.
So, and so the concept of no, abundance is actually the reality, that what you give out comes back to you tenfold. That's something that I learned when I used to attend the Unity Church, and I love that concept, that what you put out into the world comes
Yeah,
back.
man. And that's so true. That's so much more of the truth.
And that,
So
yeah,
much more of the
that
truth.
is the
Yeah,
truth. But for
that's
our
so much more of the truth.
society, look, so if you think back to when my ancestors colonized this land, we came to this land because we were
Mhm.
fleeing persecution. We for and
Limited thinking,
perceived
power and
persecution.
control.
Right, right.
Yes.
So we
Poor
came to this
abundance.
land, and we
Yeah,
saw it, and we said we want this.
yeah.
And what was the moment when we met the indigenous people that we said we need to destroy them rather than join with them? It was that scarcity mentality already in our indoctrination from where we came from, probably because the
100%.
European mindset.
Because that's white supremacy.
Right, right, white supremacy. So
White supremacy that goes and says,
right,
I found a land where millions of
nobody
people
was there.
existed in civilization.
Right.
That's the psychology of that just because you don't look white identified, that means that
That
you
means you're not
are not to be
worthy.
counted as
Right.
existing as human.
Well, it's what happened in Palestine, a land without a people for a
It's
people without a land. So,
it's happened everywhere. It has
every,
happened
everywhere.
everywhere that
So,
that
yeah,
white
it was the
identified
imperialism
humans have gone.
concept, the colonizing concept, right? So, yeah, the scarcity. That's what I wish I could talk to people in power and just say, why is it that you are more willing to buy in to the scarcity ideology than to the expansion ideology? What
Power and control.
control? And yet they are
Period.
killing themselves with all this supposed power that they think they have, because we're
Mhm.
killing the planet.
Because holding it for the moment, right? Holding it for the moment in your presence and in your existence when
Yeah,
you're an individualistic human being
right,
is okay,
right.
right?
Because all the
When
foundations
you
are,
don't have this give and take, when you don't see the necessity for expansion because it's beyond what you actually need,
yeah,
then that's how you're going to exist.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that's the harm that that we're experiencing now, present day, and U.S. policy making through Project 2025 and Trump's leadership with that.
yeah.
Though he said that he was completely separated from that, we see that he is just right in the, like,
Only
and nobody is talking
he
about
only
the
separated
lies of
himself
that.
because he didn't
Nobody
write it.
has even like, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, you said that you weren't going to participate, but you're just turning the pages of
Well,
the
I
blueprints
I
and
think
signing
he
the papers.
separated himself from it because he didn't write it. He wanted
That's
the
interesting.
I wonder if he wanted
Mm,
if the authorship was actually him, like if he
hmm
actually wrote it and it wasn't put together by all this group of people. I think
hmm
that's might be why he separated himself from it. He's still doing it, but he's only doing
Yeah.
it, he only talks about it in the framework of I'm doing this. I'm doing
hmm
this, I'm doing this. You don't hear him say, I'm doing this because I got it out of Project 2025. He
hmm
doesn't want to give anybody else props for coming up with these ideas. He
I
wants,
hear you. I hear that.
yeah, he
Yeah.
wants it to be his.
And you know what this brings me back to, and I'm hoping that our listeners will visit this. It really does bring me back to one of our earlier episodes when we talked about your grandfather, being a part of the KKK and that document that we have. Like the Project 2025 document, and we said it during that podcast. It really looks like Klan directives
Yeah,
back in the day.
yeah,
And so, if we're looking at history and we're looking at what systems of oppression, how
Mhm.
they are continued, how they're continued, that's enough to say.
Yeah.
You can see the similarities in the two.
Yeah.
And you can see from that period of time how long it took us to get to civil rights. I wanted to go back to affirmative action
Mm.
and DEI because there was like the distinction. What I the focus of affirmative action more was placed alongside the civil rights movement. So it really was a story narrative that expanded to a larger demographic of people, but it really got centered into Blackness and Black people being able to have the access where there was a lack of access in the history of the United States for a long period of time.
Mhm.
DEI now is talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as we've evolved with expanded thinking, what
Yes.
we've come to understand is our larger community is
Mhm.
filled with people who have accessibility needs, that have other abilities, like that have neurodivergence, that have are on a spectrum, or and so we don't want to discount the existence of those human beings. And
Right.
with DEI, it it under the definition that I'm still speaking about, because if we're talking about white supremacy and capitalism, it doesn't take into account anything that's not going to increase the bottom line.
Mhm.
And it doesn't acknowledge having differences in the ways that it increases the bottom line. DEI allows for the exploration of that, to
Mm.
say everybody is a part of this process and has something to contribute. And we need to understand the contributions of those people to this process so that we can make sure that we are having better outcomes. So, affirmative action, really having the narrative around accessibility for Blackness and also women, the gender conversation. So it was very racial and gender
Mhm.
positioned when we're talking about affirmative action. And in this space now, in our present day, because there has been advances
Mhm.
with expanded thinking in those two areas, we're also now able to think about all of the other identities and all the other accessibility needs and all the other ability needs that people have. Ageism, as our population is becoming older, does that mean then healthcare has improved? Does that mean that we can shift the age of retirement because people are healthier for longer periods so it's like things like that DEI allows us to really think about and explore as we're setting up our social engineering. It's critical. And that's the part that the Trump administration is missing.
Mhm.
And in missing that and placing all these things in reestablishing the white nation in the way that the US is trying to do right now, the thing that I continue to keep on saying is that whiteness and white supremacy hurts white people more than it hurts other people, and people don't think about that. Like other people get harmed, like have the direct impact. So I always qualify it
Yeah,
with
I
that,
don't
the
know if it's
direct
more.
impact.
Do you think it's more
Yeah, but
or
like I do think it's more because y'all exist in mental health and don't think it's mental health.
yeah, that's for damn sure. That's for damn sure.
Like so, right? If you work in mental health and you see a person existing in their, let's say, multiple personalities, they don't know that they're existing in their multiple personalities, and they're really in their life, and their life is chaotic and hectic and
Mhm.
harm. They're in more harm than the person that's watching them, or the
Mhm.
person that might have met them as the 16-year-old versus the man when when they're doing the multiple personality or whatever the person. Do you see what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
that person might have an impact of having that engagement, but they're not in the existence of the person with multiple personalities who can't ground themselves. And that's what whiteness is: multiple personalities of stuff that like everyone else is getting impacted by it, but like how do we fix the actual root of sickness?
Yeah.
Because that's what that's what whiteness exists under:
Yeah.
sickness. And take care of your sickness.
Why do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks for
I
joining
give a
us.
fuck?
Until next time,
Why
as you
do I
move
try
throughout
so
your day,
hard? Why am I
continue to
so
ask yourself,
touched? Why do I give a fuck?
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with JoHanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.